All right, welcome back to the 7th Emerging Growth Conference. I'm Anna Berry. It's been a great morning so far, and we have some fantastic presentations coming up for you today. Let's start with AzurRx, or AzurRx BioPharma, Inc. It trades on the NASDAQ under the symbol AZRX and is a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company specializing in the development of targeted non-systemic therapies for gastrointestinal diseases. Joining us today, we have Martin Krusen, SVP of Corporate Development, and we have Dan Schneiderman, the CFO. Welcome, Martin.
Hi, Anna. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to hear your presentation. So the floor is yours whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. And thank you for having us participate in this year's Emerging Growth Conference. So we're AzurRx BioPharma. And as Anna said, we are a biotechnology company specializing in the treatment of gastrointestinal diseases. I'm just putting up our company disclaimer with forward-looking statements and moving on to the company. So for those of you who don't know our story, AzurRx is a clinical stage biotech company focused on the development of targeted non-systemic therapies for gastrointestinal diseases. We have 2 assets and we're pursuing 3 clinical indications. Our first asset is the MS1819 lipase for the treatment of exocrine pancreatic insufficiency, or EPI. This EPI is a digestive disorder, a life-threatening digestive disorder that afflicts patients with cystic fibrosis and chronic pancreatitis. We're currently running 2 phase 2 clinical trials. The first is the option 2 monotherapy trial, and we recently announced top-line data for that last quarter. And we're currently running the combination therapy trial, which consists of our drug MS1819 in combination with the standard of care. And we will be announcing top-line data for that trial this quarter. Our next asset is micronized nucleosimide. This is a drug that we recently in-licensed early this year, and this is a repurposed drug with potent antiviral and anti-inflammatory properties. We're running 2 clinical indications. The first, the FW1022 program, is for COVID-19 GI infections, and we recently announced the launch of a phase 2 trial earlier this quarter. We also have another trial that will be initiating in Q2 2021, and that's the FW420 program. And this is for the treatment of immune checkpoint inhibitor-associated colitis and diarrhea, or ICI-AC or ICE-IC. We'll be launching a phase 1b/2a trial this quarter. And this is a drug that is used to treat diarrhea and colitis for patients advanced cancer patients taking immune checkpoint inhibitors. All of our assets leverage the company's core competencies and expertise in developing targeted, safe, non-systemic oral GI therapies. And these are fairly large market opportunities. We're addressing significant unmet needs in various indications. Our management team has a combined experience of developing and launching over 25 drugs. James Sapirstein, our CEO and president, unfortunately couldn't make it today due to a scheduling conflict, but James has been in the industry over 30 years, both at Big Pharma, as well as the CEO of 4 publicly traded biotechs, where he launched products and also took the company through exits. Jim Pennington, our chief medical officer, has been in the space even longer, over 40 years. And Jim started at Harvard Medical School before moving to industry at Bayer and other companies. Jim's expertise, like James, is in infectious diseases, as well as in CF and GI. Dan Schneiderman, our CFO, who's joining the call, is our CFO. He started out in investment banking and then moved through various levels of professional expertise as a controller, VP of finance, and CFO at several companies, most recently at Biofetus and now at AzurRx. And I'm Martin Krusen, the SVP for Corporate Development. My background is over 20 plus years in various business functions, both at large Fortune 50 corporations, as well as a number of med tech and biotech companies. So in terms of where we are, we have 3 clinical stage programs. As I mentioned before, we have 2 assets, the MS1819 lipase and nucleosimide. So in terms of where we are, we primarily have phase 2 clinical assets. So we are moving very aggressively on these programs. As mentioned, for the MS1819 lipase, the monotherapy program recently announced top-line data. And we're currently running the combination therapy trial, again, with top-line data anticipated this quarter. The next milestone for the program will be a phase 2C program where we utilize a new formulation of enteric microbeads. And we are optimistic that with the new formulation, we'll be able to advance to a subsequent phase 3. The Nucleosimide program, as mentioned, there are 2 indications that we're pursuing, one in COVID GI infections, the other in immune checkpoint inhibitor-associated colitis. On the GI front, we've launched the trial last quarter. We anticipate top-line data early next year. We think this is a potential candidate for emergency use authorization. With the checkpoint inhibitor colitis program, we plan to initiate that this quarter. And this will be an 18-month trial. We think that this has the potential for breakthrough designation in terms of regulatory pathway. So let's begin by talking about our lead compound, our lead therapeutic, MS-1819. MS-1819 is a recombinant lipase. That is, it's an enzyme that's been engineered by our company to treat EPI. And we focus on 2 patient populations, cystic fibrosis and chronic pancreatitis. This is a fairly large market, over 2 billion globally, and at this point, over 1.5 billion in the US alone. And our drug is a synthetic alternative to the standard of care, which is porcine pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy. In other words, the ground up pancreases of pigs, which are formulated and put into capsules for patients to take. There is a very clear unmet medical need. As mentioned before, EPI is a life-threatening disease. Without treatment to resolve nutritional issues, patients are afflicted by many issues and pathologies, and it can be life-threatening. With our program, we've run a number of phase 2 clinical trials prior to the 2 we're running, and the product has been demonstrated to be both safe and with efficacy. We've seen signal across. And mentioned before, we're pursuing 2 tracks. One is a monotherapy to potentially replace the standard of care, and the other is as a combination therapy with the standard of care to treat refractory patients. That is the 30% of cystic fibrosis patients with severe EPI who cannot get adequate nutrition on the standard of care. So what is EPI? It's a chronic nutritional deficiency, whereas the pancreas is damaged, and it doesn't produce the digestive enzymes needed to break a food in the GI tract so that nutrients can be absorbed. There are a number of morbidities. Patients aren't able to absorb fat. They can't gain or retain weight. They have frequent bowel movements and diarrhea, and they suffer from discomfort and pain, abdominal pain. And we focus on 2 patient populations: those who have the disease genetically, cystic fibrosis patients, about 30,000 patients. And this is, from the time they're infants throughout life, it's a chronic disease. And those who have chronic pancreatitis, close to 90,000 patients, and it's more heterogeneous there. It can be from alcoholism, pancreatic cancer, and pancreatic surgery. Once patients have it, at that stage, it typically occurs later in life. They have it for the duration of their life. As mentioned before, this is a very large market. The data needs to be replaced. In the US, it's over 1.5 billion at this point, and globally over 2 billion, and it's growing. And what's interesting to note is that there are 2 dominant players in the US, the product made by AbbVie Creon and Nestle's Zenpep product, sort of with an 80-20 market share. And essentially, this is a drug that's been around since the 19th century. Again, consisting of ground-up pig pancreas that's given to patients to help them manage their nutrition. I would add that our goal is to have a replacement therapy for this as a recombinant therapy, and we think there's a good analog in Humulin. About 30 years ago, patients were taking bovine and porcine-derived insulin, and today they don't. They take a recombinant drug. So it's a situation in which a recombinant drug completely replaces animal-sourced products, and we think that's a good predicate for us. So in terms of what we're doing, we think we do fulfill an unmet medical need. As mentioned before, PERTs are derived from pigs. They're ground-up pancreases of pigs, and what we have instead is a recombinant yeast. It's a lipase, or an enzyme that breaks up fat in the food of patients. One aspect is our enzyme is more stable in the acidic environment of the GI tract versus that of PERT. And we think it has a better safety profile. There are some concerns about using pig-derived products. If you take too many of the capsules, there's a black box warning regarding a condition called fibrosing colonopathy, which could be potentially fatal at high doses. So it's on the black box warning. And it turns out that about a third of CF patients with severe EPI can't get controlled on PERT, and they can't dose up because of this black box warning. To date, we've had no safety issues with our drug, and there's no risk of fibrosing colonopathy because we have a different mechanism of action. What does it mean practically for patients? Well, patients with CF can be taking up to 25 to 40 pills per day over the course of their life. And that's in addition to all the other medication they take, for respiratory and anti-infective issues. We believe we can reduce the number of pills to maybe 8 to 16 a day, potentially lower, and have a smaller pill size. If you look on the right, you see a graphic illustration of what we're hoping to accomplish. Again, reduce pill burden and pill size. And in terms, from a commercial standpoint, we think we have some advantages. The drug is safe. There's no risk of animal pathogens, and we think we can reproduce it fairly reliably and consistently. That's like making beer and fermenters. Whereas with pigs, as everybody knows, there's a significant concern these days about the risk of transmission of animal pathogens. In China alone, where much of the API comes from for these products, about half of the pig population was culled about 2 years ago. And it turns out that different pigs have different properties. So there can be inconsistency in the capsules themselves depending on where they source the product from. So we think we have some advantages, again, being a recombinant drug, we think will be a very safe profile, having a lower pill burden and size, and again, not being involved, in the animal supply chain. So we have a differentiated mechanism of action and, a safe drug to date. So where are we? Currently, we're running 2 phase 2 trials. The option 2 trial was conducted on 30 patients in the US and Poland, and we announced top-line data last month. What we announced was, though, we saw a safe drug, and we saw that a number of patients responded. We did not get over the primary efficacy endpoint on average. And as a consequence, we'll be reformulating the drug as enteric microbeads to launch a phase 2C trial at some point later this year or early next year. The combination trial, which is ongoing and which we plan to announce top-line data for this quarter, is running with 20 patients in Hungary and Turkey. There, we've been using our drug in combination with PERT, again, for this 30% of patients who are refractory. And when we put out interim data on the first 5 patients, we saw that there were clinically meaningful improvements on the first 5 patients in the study. They got across the primary efficacy endpoint, and there were other improvements in secondary endpoints, such as weight gain, reduction in abdominal pain, and reduction in the number of bowel movements. And again, we anticipate top-line data for that trial this quarter. Turning to our next asset, Nucleosimide. This is a drug that we recently in-licensed from First Wave Bio this early January. And we're very excited about this drug. Why? Well, it's a drug that's been around for some time. It's a repurposed drug that was approved in 1982 by the FDA to treat tapeworm infections. It's been used on millions of patients. It has a very clean safety record. And we think it's ideal for GI targeted agents. Why? It has low oral bioavailability and minimal systemic exposure, meaning we can target the drug and it's non-systemic. So we can focus on targeting the drug to the GI tract. And what's interesting about the drug is it inhibits pro-inflammatory pathways. So basically, it's an anti-inflammatory, in other words, and it's non-steroidal. As many of you may know, steroids, are anti-inflammatory. However, they're also immunosuppressant, and that's the challenge of steroids, that they can weaken the immune system and often cause patients to go off the drug that they're using to treat the condition they're in. So, we see that we have an opportunity to do something with an anti-inflammatory without immunosuppressant aspects. And this can be combined with various standards of care, to use those drugs in combination with ours without having patients get off the drug that they're taking. So why did we license this early this year? Well, we think it's with the formulation that we in-license, micronized Nucleosimide, may work in multiple GI indications. As mentioned, it's not systemically absorbed. We can put more of the drug in the GI system, and it avoids steroid-related complications. We saw early data from a study that First Wave is running, and it was very promising. And we have a very robust IP portfolio that we in-licensed. We also see that for both indications, we may be able to obtain expedited regulatory pathways, both for the COVID indication as well as for ICI colitis. So just delving a little bit more into the formulation, through micronization, we're able to reduce the particle size by an order of magnitude. And this allows us to put more drug or have greater surface area to drug in the GI system. We can dissolve it in the GI system, and we can, again, put greater concentrations. On earlier studies, we found that this worked in animals. It's very safe. And again, the drug has a fantastic safety profile, that's been amassed over the last 50 years on millions of patients. So jumping into the use of Nucleosimide for treating COVID GI. COVID-19, as I don't need to remind anybody, is the medical problem of our time. And there's definitely an acute need for treating COVID-19 GI infections, something which many people are unaware of. More specifically, about 18% of patients who have acute COVID have GI symptoms, and this could be diarrhea, abdominal pain, vomiting. So that, again, almost 20% of COVID patients have GI symptoms. But it turns out that when patients' stool samples were collected, almost half of them have viral RNA, COVID viral RNA, in their stools, meaning that, again, 20% of patients are acute and they're symptomatic, but another 30% are asymptomatic. They don't have this the COVID GI symptoms, but it's in their tract, and they could potentially spread it. So this is quite significant. It's something that many people are unaware of. So our theory is that there may be a reservoir of COVID GI in COVID in the GI tract, and what we're trying to do is destroy COVID in the GI tract with our drug, and reduce the symptoms such as diarrhea. There's no treatment for COVID GI on the market. And there's an urgent need to reduce the hospital burden of patients and potential hospital spread. So again, our solution is a targeted drug to destroy COVID-19 in the GI tract, and that can also be administered in an outpatient setting. I want to add one more thing here, that in addition to looking at acute cases of COVID, as many of you are aware, there's also the phenomenon known as long haul or long COVID. And that afflicts up to 10% of patients who previously had COVID. And with long COVID patients, almost half of them have GI symptoms. So we see this as a therapy for patients who are in hospital, who are outpatients with acute COVID, as well as potentially for long haul COVID patients. So, why are we optimistic about this drug? It turns out that Nucleosimide had the best activity against COVID-19 in a study in Korea. It was 40 times more effective than remdesivir for treating COVID-19. And what does it do? It basically induces cell death in COVID cells when it's being targeted. In our case, in the GI system. We know that when the drug is applied to animals, it's non-systemic. So again, we think we can have a targeted gut-restricted drug. What's important is the FDA approved the IND for the drug and allowed us to move directly into phase 2. And the trial, which we're calling Reservoir, was initiated April. We anticipate data for the trial early next year. And we think this has significant commercial potential as a drug with low COGS and the ability to scale up. So what is the trial? Again, we're looking at a phase 2 trial, where we're looking at hospitalized and primarily outpatient patients who have COVID-19, who've been diagnosed with COVID-19. And what we're looking to do is put them on a 2-week treatment of tablets and see if their diarrhea is resolved. And again, just to remind everyone, there is no treatment for COVID-19 GI infections. We'll be the first to market, if we're successful. Jumping to our next asset, which is checkpoint colitis. This is a condition, immune checkpoint inhibitor-associated colitis, is a condition that afflicts patients on immune checkpoint inhibitors. And for those of you who don't know about this, this is a significant breakthrough innovation for treating advanced cancer patients, ICIs. And it's emerged over the last decade, from its development to what amounts today to be over a $20 billion market. This is a fantastic therapy that's benefiting hundreds of thousands of patients. However, there are side effects, like with any chemotherapy or therapy targeted for advanced cancer patients. And the problem is that when patients develop diarrhea or colitis, it can be potentially life-threatening, and it causes patients to get off their off the treatment. Treating it with systemic immunosuppressants like steroids reduces the progression-free survival of these patients, meaning they have to get off the checkpoint inhibitors, which are intended to save their lives. So there's a definite unmet clinical need for a non-steroidal treatment option, and especially doing this at an early stage when diarrhea manifests, because if you don't treat this early, it can quickly and unpredictably turn into colitis, which again can be fatal and causes patients to get off treatment. So, we think there's a fantastic opportunity, for Nucleosimide to treat this indication. I won't get into too much detail here, but this slide illustrates the progression of ICI-associated colitis from grade 1 to grade 4. And what we're trying to do is target grade 1 patients. If we can stop it there, we can prevent progression to colitis and keep patients on their immune checkpoint inhibitors. That's the goal. So in terms of the problem, there are about 250,000 cancer patients were eligible for treatment with ICIs. That is, about 44% of all cancer patients should be eligible for taking ICIs. And the use of these drugs is increasing. We know that more patients will take them. We also know that of the main drugs that you've heard of Yervoy, Opdivo, Truvada, which are listed on commercials, that a whole host of new drugs are in the pipeline and will be coming to market. So the use of ICIs will increase. And the trend is towards using them in combination. And the problem by using them in combination is it leads to increased diarrhea and colitis. So, there's an opportunity for us to help patients on this front. And based upon which drugs are used or in combination, up to 30% develop diarrhea and potentially can develop colitis. The issue there is that if they get diarrhea, the onset to colitis is very fast and unpredictable. I won't get into the detail of this, but this slide illustrates the use of various immune checkpoint inhibitors, ones that you may be aware of, like Yervoy and Opdivo, and what's the incidence. As you can see, 25 to 30% in the case of Yervoy for diarrhea development, and then colitis, if you scroll to the right. When the drugs are used in combination, it can be up to 50% of patients having diarrhea. So this is what we're focused on. And again, what's the solution? We think that we can quickly move to solve this problem by targeting the GI tract and reducing systemic immunosuppression and allowing patients to continue on their standard of care. What's also beneficial is that the drug can be used in an outpatient treatment setting. And finally, we think that the drug has the potential for breakthrough designation potential because we're dealing with advanced cancer patients. Moving towards our IP, we have a very well established IP portfolio, which gives us protection for all the indications that I've discussed. The first is for MSAT19. Our core patent is for the composition of matter and methods of production. The patent lasts through 2028 in the US, with potential Hatch-Waxman extension up to 2033. And in addition, the FDA grants another 12 years of clinical exclusivity for novel biologics from first approval. In Europe, it's about 10 years. In addition, we're filing new IP for life cycle management with anticipated expiration, well into 20 years from now. On the Nucleosimide front, we've licensed the asset, and there's a very strong patent portfolio there as well. On the colitis side, claims were allowed for various formulations and indications, primarily for the use of oral tablets, which we're using for COVID, and for tablets and enema formulations in the case of checkpoint colitis. And colitis is an indication that's been covered in the patent and allowed. On the COVID-19 front, we announced a few months ago that the IP for the use of Nucleosimide to treat GI symptoms of COVID was allowed. So we have protection there. And finally, additional IP was filed for the micronized Nucleosimide formulation. And that's in process. So in summary, we're a clinical stage biotech company focused on the development of therapeutics for GI diseases, where we have 3 targeted non-systemic clinical stage programs in our pipeline. The first, as mentioned, is the MSAT19 program for treating EPI and cystic fibrosis, where we're running 2 phase 2 clinical trials, which with readouts in the first half of this year. And our plan is to move to a phase 2C with a new formulation, enteric microbead formulation, as in the monotherapy setting later this year, early next year. We're also running 2 other programs of using Nucleosimide, one for COVID-19 GI infections. That's a trial we recently started. And we think that this would have emergency use authorization potential. And we want to get this drug into the clinic as quickly as possible. As mentioned before, this is a drug that can treat acute COVID patient GI symptoms, and we believe also long COVID GI patients. And finally, there's the immune checkpoint inhibitor-associated colitis program, where we're using two formulations, we're using the micronized nucleosimide formulation, both as a tablet and as a topical formulation. And we plan to initiate that study this quarter. And again, we think that has the potential as a breakthrough designated product because we're treating advanced cancer patients. All of our programs address significant unmet medical needs in fairly substantial markets. And we have a strong management team that's has experience in these areas and the ability to take these drugs to market. I would say, and just maybe in conclusion, the company has been investing heavily in building up our clinical team, as well as our manufacturing capabilities to make sure that we have drugs that are ready to go to market. And with that, I'll turn it over to Q&A, and I'll be joined by my colleague, Dan Schneiderman, who would also be able to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Fantastic presentation. Thank you so much, Martin. Well, we do have quite a few questions, but we only have a few minutes. So let's get to a few of them, and then we'll send the rest of them to you so you can answer directly. All right. So are you in contact with the two dominant players in the space on any level?
I can answer this. I believe, the question refers to the strategic players in the PERT side for exocrine pancreatic insufficiency. And I can say that the company has been in contact with all the major players over the years, for these indications. They're definitely watching our progress, and we are in touch with them.
Okay. So what is the expected timeline to complete phase 2 and further phase 3?
So with phase 2, we recently announced we provided top-line data for the monotherapy program of MS-1819, and we'll be announcing top-line data for the combination therapy this quarter. And then we plan to move to a phase 2C trial with a new formulation. And that it should take a similar timeline to the previous trials in the past. They're fairly quick trials, they're efficient to run, and we know how to do them. So, in terms of a phase 3, TBD, but, we plan to have the phase 2C probably late this year or early next year.
So when do you see your company realizing some revenue?
It's a great question. We see ourselves as a clinical stage development company and not as one that commercializes our drugs. So the goal is to find partners who would take the drugs and bring them to market.
Concerning the COVID GI symptoms, would you like to see your solution licensed to a major, or would you market it and distribute it on your own?
This is similar to the previous question. We look to other companies who have the commercial ability and reach to take product to market internationally.
And would your COVID treatment be paid by the government, or is this covered under insurance? How does that work?
It's a great question. I think this would, fall in the same category as other therapeutics that are being developed for COVID. The one thing that I can say is this: we imagine this is being Nucleosimide is a repurposed drug. The cost will not be onerous and something that should be affordable. It's a 2-week treatment, and we envision this being used by millions of patients potentially.
Do you have any concern about your IP, that it could be compromised?
Not at the moment. We think we have a very robust patent portfolio, and we don't see any challengers, on the horizon based upon our periodic reviews.
So your R&D expenses is down about 30% in 2020. Do you see that continuing to decrease?
I will turn that over to Dan, but I can maybe add one comment there. We've been focused on clinical development. So we've basically reduced our R&D activities for preclinical assets, and we're primarily focused, indeed, our budget is towards clinical development and manufacturing. So I think that answers that question.
Okay.
This is Dan Schneiderman. I think we're going to see the R&D continue to pick up. 2020 was a challenging year due to COVID. We had some slowdowns in our clinical trials. It picked up towards the end of the year as we ran both the option 2 and our combination trial. And I think in 2020 it's going to pick up as we bring our Nucleosimide drugs to trial as well.
Okay, and last question, same vein. Are you currently raising money to fund R&D and other operations? And is that equity or debt? And will any of the instruments be convertible? Your current notes payable, are they convertible notes?
This is Dan. We do not have any debt outstanding. In the first quarter, we raised $8 million. In January, we raised another $10 million in common stock in March. We also have warrant exercises for over $5 million. So right now we have a good cash position, but we're always opportunistic.
All right, gentlemen. Well, thank you, Martin, for the presentation. Thank you, Dan, for some of these answers. And we appreciate your time, and we really look forward to all of your updates.
Thank you, Anna. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Well, everyone, remember that you're going to experience a quick black screen for a moment as we transition to the next presenter, but stay with us. We'll be right back. And if you're on an Apple device, click the play button to launch the next live presentation. We'll be right back.